Hello and welcome to the Homegrown Private Members Club, Zoe, and of course the Healed Approach podcast. So Zoe Wyrko, thank you so much for being here today.
It's an absolute pleasure.
So I was thinking really hard about what it is we're going to touch on today, because we could talk about lots of things for a very long time. And I know that we came across each other because we were both at a Women in Retirement Living event. Yeah. We both, obviously you work for Retirement Living Operator, that's the one, yes. Riverstone.
Yeah.
You're the Wellbeing Director, that's right.
Wellbeing and Quality Director.
Oh.
Recently had a promotion.
Oh, okay, congratulations. They knew you were coming on the podcast, of course. So obviously we both, do some work in the industry. I've got clients that are in construction within retirement living. But I think what really, I suppose, struck a chord with you, Zoe, is I think your transition from NHS, from which I'll let you explain, into what you're doing now, which is very similar to kind of my transition from education into construction. So tell us about that, please.
It's one of those things where if I look back, I think, how on earth was I brave enough? I think is the real thought. So my career, I've worked with people my entire life. When I start saying to people, I'm just going to take you back to when I was 14, it's highly relevant. It wasn't just to poke around. My first job was as kitchen assistant in a nursing home.
Oh, okay.
And the reason I got that job was my mum was a staff nurse in the nursing home and they needed a Saturday girl. So I worked my way up. So school holidays, I'd do the cleaning as well. When the cleaner was off, got to 16 and it was like, Zoe's old enough to be a healthcare assistant now. So I learnt those real essences of care, of looking after somebody, of making sure their basic needs are met in what was, I knew at the time it was a nice place to be, but, with retrospect, I discovered it was a really excellent care home that I was fortunate enough to work in. And meanwhile, I was always, planning on going off to medical school. That was my ambition, to be a doctor. Fast forward many, many years, I've decided to specialise in healthcare of older people, consultant geriatrician. So I'd spent 10 years training and 5 years at medical school, 10 years training once you're actually working as a doctor, and then you get to be a consultant and you discover you still don't really know anything because you're just learning continuously. And I then, after 11 years as a hospital consultant, left. And that's something that people don't do. How I came to leave, I'm a firm believer in taking opportunities when they come to you. I've learnt that's just the way to roll, even if it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable or it's a little bit out of the ordinary. I was fortunate enough to make some television programmes with Channel 4. And they were called Old People's Home for 4-year-olds. It wasn't actually an old people's home, it was retirement villages.
Okay.
We made 2 series and it was really simple. We put a group of 4-year-olds into a retirement community. Series 1 for 6 weeks, Series 2 for 12 weeks. And we looked at what happened to the older adults and we looked at what happened to the children. And the older adults became less frail. They moved more. They were happier. Amazing. They were more engaged. The children engaged more, became really considerate, their language came along, and it was great. And Trish, the executive producer, said, this will change the lives of everybody involved in it. And I could see everybody else's lives changing, certainly the older adults and the children. And where I stayed in touch with people, you could just see they were living longer and healthier. I saw various opportunities to my other, co-presenters, the other experts who were on it with me, and nothing was happening. And then I got an approach out of the blue from this startup business with 0 operational sites, but 2 building sites at that point, to say, can you come and be on an advisory group for us? We see about putting children into retirement communities. Obviously, really going and taking the opportunity on this one, I didn't tell them that they'd seen everything I knew about putting 4-year-olds into retirement communities on the TV. I don't own a 4-year-old. I never have and have no intention of that. But I was like, no, this sounds really, really good. This was also through COVID. So I was working in A&E in central Birmingham, running the front door older people services. So I was quite busy and I had these really quite posh people phoning me up saying, have you got time for a call? I'm like, I've got to go and talk to the ambulance, but I've got 10 minutes.
It's a different world, right?
It was a different
I can
world.
vouch for that. Yeah.
And, from having been in one and then the other, you cannot even imagine the other world. You know, they are just so different. So they managed to persuade me because I liked the concept. Some retirement communities can be quite ghettoed. They can be sort of isolated. They can have fences around them. And I didn't like that model. But after making the TV programmes, I'd actually been out to the Netherlands with Extra Care Charitable Trust, just looking at some of their building design and seeing how it was really important for them that their buildings were part of the community. So they'd do things like make sure there was a cafe. They'd perhaps put an extra door in, so what might be a blank wall facing onto other housing or a garden would actually have a door in to, you know, really invite the community in. And one of the things that struck me about Riverstone was they would just, you know, last block on an existing development or a new development. So really bringing in that part of the surrounding community. So I thought, well, it's an advisory group, I'll give it a go. And then I showed them that I knew a lot about other things, about systems and services to help older people stay well, get well again if they get ill, or, you know, if they need end-of-life care, do that well in somebody's own environment. And they offered me a job. And I said, no, I couldn't possibly do that because your mindset as
so conditioned.
Yeah. Well, yeah, your mindset as an NHS doctor is you don't do anything else. You've got
it's a bit like being a teacher.
Yeah. You know, if you want to go up, you know, it's fine to just stay as your ordinary jobbing consultant. You know, if you want to go up and do different things, there's those really, really set routes. So you do academia, which was never me. You do medical management. And that's absolutely where I was heading, you know, medical director roles. And I was actively applying for them. And I don't know whether it was, you know, the result of, you know, possibly the hardest 15 months work of my life in central Birmingham. You know, we had more deaths in my hospital trust than any other in Europe, surely, just because of, you know, the size of it. But it was a tough place to be working. It was a tough job. And maybe I was just so burnt out that I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And I thought, well, I can always go back. And that was 4 years ago. So I'm not going back. I absolutely love what I do. I mean, I often say that my job is ridiculous. Obviously, I hope nobody from Riverstone is listening to this, but
I hope they are.
Basically, I got given almost a blank sheet of paper to design the gold standard for looking after and keeping older people well. What I had to do in the NHS was pick people up once it had all gone wrong. And we just see, you know, particularly working in the accident and emergency department with my therapy team and the specialist nurses and other doctors, you'd see where if an intervention was available, so that could be a support package or somebody able to move into housing that was suitable for their needs, you would stop that next decline from happening. But you just can't do anything about it. Being very fortunate and working at Riverstone where people are able to afford what they need, we can stop so much of that from happening. We can help people to understand their own health. We can help them to access support when they require it. And yeah, my job is just brilliant. I have a lot of jealous geriatrician friends.
I can imagine. And I've had the pleasure of coming along to one of your sites. And yeah, it was a great experience. It completely changed my view of what retirement living is. I don't think, that's the other thing, is that, you know, I don't think a lot of people even understand the difference between a care home and a retirement living facility. And can you maybe explain that briefly?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, you are completely right that people don't understand the difference. A care homes are really important.
100%, yeah.
You know, they've got a huge role to play. You know, I have a soft spot for them. And they serve a very particular purpose, or they should serve a particular purpose. You can hear people talking about residential homes or nursing homes. The difference is the qualifications of the people who work in them. So a nursing home has to have at least one trained, registered nurse on shift. A care home may just have carers. And I hate having to use the word just there, but a whole different thing I can talk for hours about is how badly and poorly carers are treated and how that particular skill set isn't recognised.
I've had that conversation recently.
Yeah.
I had
a brilliant chat with the Care Workers charity. They are an absolute fascinating bunch of people who really, really campaign for that. But anyway, so care homes, Average length of stay for somebody moving into a care home is 9 months for nursing and 18 months for residential. Your end point at a care home, if it's a nursing home particularly, is death. Some people move into residential homes and then need to move into nursing homes. And that's what they can do very well. Why do people move into care homes? Often because they've left everything too late. And that used to be a conversation I'd often have. I've got Mrs. Smith on a trolley in A&E in front of me. She's had a nasty fall. There's nothing broken, but there's bad bruising. She's got a pneumonia. She's been struggling at home. Her super caring daughters have been, more or less running a shift, looking after her. And they come in and say, I think it's time for mum to go into sheltered housing now. Yeah. And I used to have to say, I'm really sorry, but if your mum gets over the pneumonia, it's probably too late for sheltered housing. Sheltered housing is a byword for whether that's, retirement living, but that suitable housing, single level, with a variety of different facilities. How sheltered housing, sheltered housing can just be a more suitable, usually single level flat. If it's on several floors, there'll be a lift up to the flats on other floors. There may be a communal area, communal lounge or gardens. There may be a warden, perhaps coming in 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, predominantly just to check everybody's okay to make sure the building's running. There's usually a call bell or an alarm system, but if people need personal support or care, they have to get that themselves, or social services are involved in providing it. That's bottom end, but that's really good for some people. My granddad moved into one of those in the local village, meaning he could stay in his community for the last year or so of his life because he was in a completely unsuitable house. So those are a brilliant thing, especially where you've got small numbers in villages. What integrated retirement communities are the super duper version of that. And that's what Riverstone is. Retirement communities, again, serve the absolute full range of the housing sector. So whether that's from social rents, rent, privately owned top end as we are. And what you have there is very much your own apartment, your own
nice apartments too.
Yeah. I mean. Absolutely your own front door. There will be staff of some type on site 24 hours a day. There will be some type of call system with some way of responding to it. So for Riverstone, our concierge team are trained up how to respond, what to do in emergency. They're not care staff. They don't make any care or medical decisions, but they're trained to algorithms. For other facilities, that might actually be that call goes through to one of the expert call centres. Absolutely fine. Really doesn't matter which. So somebody on site 24 hours a day, and then you'll have a certain level of amenities. So there'll be somewhere you can get food. There may be a gym, there may be a swimming pool, hairdressing salon, craft rooms, garden, you name
Virtual
it,
golf.
Can be there. Virtual golf, yes, our lovely golf simulator that we have at Fulham and that we'll have at Kings Road Park as well. And if residents need personal support or care, there will be some way of getting that into them. So that might be that the operator has their own care business, which some have. It might be that the operator has an arrangement with a local care business. It might be, as we do at Riverstone, which is where we work with a number of different partners, number of different businesses, so that we can really individually match our residents' needs and personality to the person operating it. So if you move in to an integrated retirement community, we know that you are less likely to need personal care or support. We know that if you do need it, you will need it at a lower level to living in your ordinary home. And some of that is just because there is somebody there. It's much harder to get isolated because there are people around.
I think that's a key.
Yeah, and we say very specifically at Riverstone, and that's because of the wellbeing service that I've set up and my expert wellbeing team, and because our residents are able to afford the support they might need, is if you move into Riverstone, you will never need to move into a care home.
And I think I really do. I mean, you opened my eyes to it, and I think I've spoken before. My grandma, she's very poorly at the moment, and my family, the toll it's taken on my family is massive. Obviously, there is a huge cultural aspect to that. They're Italian. They're going to look after her until the time comes. But I think had we known, or had I been able, because when I've tried to educate my family, I mean, she's too far gone for, a retirement village. And, my family won't put her into a care home. But I think had we known earlier on, it's something that we could have perhaps planned for. And I think it would be just, wise, I think, to kind of spread that message more about what is there so that people can plan for this earlier and sooner. And because I also think the quality of life that, people like my grandma could have experienced before it got to this, because you spoke about, the isolation, the impact on family, like it's taken my mum away from me and my kids, her grandchildren, but, rightly so. But, there could have been, if we'd have been more preventative, I think. But I think there is one thing as well that we need to perhaps touch on briefly is obviously it's not the most affordable option, for a lot of people. So is there, and obviously there are different ranges.
Yeah.
And I think, I know there are assisted ways to, I don't know. I know there are different models that you can work with and things like that. Because the reason I say this is that I think sometimes that's kind of one of the barriers that people go, well, it's just too expensive, I can't afford that. And of course there are going to be, like anything, there are different levels, I think, and different options to look at. And I think it's just really good for people to understand maybe that there are those options.
Yeah, there's a huge range, and there is much less at our end of the market, that real top end, than there is in other levels of the market. So I got working in the West Midlands, which is where all of my clinical work was, Birmingham and Solihull. One of the big operators there is Extra Care Charitable Trust. That's also where we filmed series 2 of Old People Same for 4-year-olds. Paul Jennings, who was chair of Extra Care, at that time was also chief exec of the Birmingham and Solihull CCG. So I sort of got to know them in several ways before I even knew I'd end up working in the sector.
I really want to say there as well, because I really don't want to forget that. I love, just to go back to the programme, this idea, obviously, of how, the impact, the positive impact that the younger people had on the older people and the older people had on the younger people. I think it's amazing, and we really need to take lessons from that and kind of take action from that too, because I think I talk a lot about this across the board in terms of the benefits, the huge benefits that we get from reverse mentoring. And I just think it's super, super powerful no matter what we're looking at, whether we're looking at new people coming into a business, whether we're looking at apprenticeships, we're looking at education, we're looking even at retirement. I think it's just such a powerful thing that we're not using enough. But anyway, yeah. Sorry, and you were
That's
talking
right.
about
No, just to go back to it, the model that they have, and how they are a charity, but they will have as their sites, they will have a mix of social rent, a mix of private rent, and some owned.
Yeah.
And different operators throughout the country, again, have different models. So, there are options out there for everybody, whatever your price range, in both accessing the apartment or house. Somewhere there's more villages, and it's much more rural. There are houses. In terms of accessing the property in the first place, whether that's a buy, a rent, a supported rent, whether you're able to sort of have equity lease, take loans out against it, again, entirely depends the operator. And then the actual model for paying both sort of a monthly fee and or then a payment at the end, the deferred fee.
I think it's just really important for people to know that there are options.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of, like I say, I think people don't necessarily understand that is the case.
And it can be hard to find those options. So I remember when Extra Care built their first village near us, and it was the one that opened on the Hagley Road. Any Brummies will know the Hagley Road very well. It's a road, but it's basically the difference between Birmingham and the Black Country, which is a completely arbitrary boundary, but very important when it comes to accessing health or rehab. If you go to the wrong hospital or your GP is on the wrong side of the road, it's a challenge. And that's really how we came to know about them. We didn't know what this place was, other than it had a lot of older people moving into it. They kept ending up in our accident and emergency department having fallen or various other things. And how I really got to know them was they were all registered with the GP on the wrong side of the Hagley Road. Yes. So they were Black Country registered, not Birmingham, which meant I couldn't get them in for rehab. So it's an entirely arbitrary thing, but we didn't know what this place was. We didn't know what it did. sort of getting our backs up. Is this like a big care home? Why is nobody being looked after? And then we learnt what they did. And I also saw our approach change, as did the local population surrounding us. So there was then one built in Bourneville. Bourneville's lovely. It's the old, it's where Cadbury's are based.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
Bourneville. I know Bourneville.
Yeah, Bourneville from the chocolate. And then you've got people, oh, they're building one there. I might have a look. Dear. My house is getting a little bit difficult with all the stairs. And then they also built one on...
Missing out.
Yeah, fear of missing out. And then they also built one on the old Rover site in Longbridge. So if you know Birmingham, Longbridge, very, very different socio-demographically to Bourneville, about 1.5 miles apart.
Yeah.
Literally, these two buildings were on the same road. I had people coming in, we've seen the hoardings go up, Dad's got his name down already. And I really loved the Longbridge one. You'd walk in and it just had the best atmosphere. They've got a mini up on the wall. I'm assured it's really bolted in. But of course, it's where the mini was made. But people were moving in there, and they were moving into the best housing they'd had for years and years and years.
Yes.
And they were also keeping their neighbours because so many people moved in from locally to within it. And families go, yep, we're going in for lunch. And I just absolutely loved that, how this went from something to be scared of to something to be aspirational about.
And integrated within what they know.
Very much part of the community that it's been built in. And I think that really sums up what we need to happen with retirement living around the country.
100%.
Because if you haven't got them, or you've just got one of the operators, and I'm not going to mention any names, but the ones that aren't members of ARCO and that don't have such a good name, and you hear people losing money on those flats, that is really unhelpful. Because with the integrated retirement community model, the flats houses don't lose money. It's proven that they resell for more than they were bought for. So money isn't lost. And that's because of the wraparound support. And once you're starting to get that critical mass, people know that they're not a care home as well. And if they know they're not a care home, they stop being afraid of them. It becomes an aspirational aim. They're not for everybody. Living communally isn't for everybody, but for...
Of course not, but there are a lot of people...
There's such a good option.
Absolutely. And I think it's always, it's being educated about those options, early enough. And all of us need to be, because all of us have got somebody in our lives, potentially. Yeah. And I think that's a really, really... kind of poignant story, I think, of how, there's obviously this kind of, how when people come together and communicate and we can all learn from each other and we can grow and aspire on the back of that. And just to point out there as well, because I do want to move on a little bit more before we wrap it up to kind of your journey as well. But I think I just wanted to also point out, you mentioned ARCO, and I think it's really important that we do mention that they're the regulatory body, aren't they?
Association of Retirement Community Operators.
Not regulatory,
it's an
word.
Unregulated sector.
It is.
And that is a good and a bad thing, having been subject to CQC regulation. But that not being regulated doesn't mean that the good operators don't want to be. So we do it voluntarily.
Yeah, and I guess my point there is that if somebody is looking into this, it's worthwhile kind of researching about ARCO, and finding out how they can help and how they can make sure that you're, going for the reputable.
Absolutely. People. You want to look for an ARCO registered operator.
Exactly. And I just wanted to make that point. But yeah, I do really want to also just kind of talk a little bit about, obviously you've spoken about, I was in education for nearly 20 years. I understand very much some of the things that you talked about there. I mean, obviously NHS education, slightly different, but lots of similarities. And I think what you touched on there about being really conditioned into thinking that that's your path. I also think education doesn't help with that either, not just the systems that we're in. But I think, you've got to where you are now within the private sector.
Yeah.
What was it like in the public sector, trying to kind of smash those ceilings and work your way up?
So that's really interesting. I was fortunate sort of through my training. So, for that 10 years before becoming a consultant, I had the opportunity to sort of work with, meet, be mentored by, to some extent, some really, outstanding individuals. They were positive. I managed to get myself into, some political and policy roles. So I was chair of the British Geriatric Society. That's the professional body for geriatricians and other health professionals interested in the healthcare of older people. I was chair of the policy committee, all of those bits and pieces. And I worked with some very, very small number of senior female consultants. At that point, a lot of male consultants. That landscape has changed now. And they were positive and supportive and, not ridiculously so, proper mentoring and saying, oh, Finbar, absolutely, Finbar's wonderful. Well, he's a semi-retired professor. And he said to me once, he said, you won't always be young and promising, And those were some of the most useful words that he could ever have said to me. And he meant them supportively.
Yeah.
And then he was worried that he'd upset me. I was like, and I still say to him, that's what you said to me. And I thought maybe there isn't a glass ceiling in medicine. And then I discovered there absolutely was. Because once
I had the same experience in education.
Because once you get your consultant post, you then become a threat to those around you.
Yeah.
When you're a registrar, when you're now called a resident doctor, a junior doctor, when I was doing it, you might always go somewhere else. You might always go away. The moment you are there, as part of a department, that's it. It just hits you. And to start with as well, I had an incredibly supportive chief exec who she'd been a nurse originally, but everything she did was about quality. Didn't matter who you were, who had that idea. If that was a good idea, she would support you to run with it. And that's how I really started learning. I've got this talent for building up systems and services. But then, of course, if you've got a supporter in a high place, that can make all of the local bullies even worse. It's how do you get through that? I think certainly having a lot more women in consultant positions in medicine, geriatric medicine, healthcare of older people, is 50% female now at a senior level. But you get that, and then people say, oh, you're being devalued as a specialty. So what I used to point out to the cardiologists who have nowhere near that ratio, I'd say, well, actually, we're not devalued. You're missing out on the talent because
devalued because
too many women.
Right,
and that whole perception of once a role's been feminised, it then becomes devalued.
But 50-50 is 50-50. How can it be?
Oh, but not when it's never been 50-50.
Yeah.
I used to point out to my lovely cardiology consultants that they were missing out on the talent pool because they weren't 50-50.
Yes, of course. And that diversity of thinking and that, balance of leadership. And it's interesting, really interesting that you mentioned about how when you had that female leader that was when you really understood where your strengths lay.
Yes, yeah.
Because I think how many of us don't recognise where our strengths lay because we're not led. I've got to admit that, it's only kind of since I've set up on my own and had lots of coaching and mentoring where I've thought, actually, I can do this pretty well. I never realised for 20 years that I couldn't, Yeah. I just ended up doing things that I was told I should do because like you said, it was the path that you followed. Yeah.
And the importance of breadth of network. So again, one of the things that Julie did, she got me onto an advisory group that was being set up to one of the telecare operators wanted to actually look at the ethics of it, realising you can't just measure things without somebody looking at it. And they got together this group of people and Julie put me forward for it. And there are people who I met through this, being massively shoved out of my comfort zone as quite a junior consultant. I still connect with them in my current role. Martin Green, who's chief exec of Care England, Amanda Thompson, who's a local London psychogeriatrician. And it was this network that Julie helped me build. You can really see that importance of that. And not allowing yourself to be siloed, even if that's what other people are trying to do to you, because it gets you out of the way, it stops your voice being heard. But it's hard to recognise that's happening to you when you're in it.
100%.
If you've not got somebody from the outside supporting you, going, come on, let's get this done.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that kind of that point as well about an outsider can often, give a fresh pair of eyes on something that, because we become very kind of, entrenched in the way that we think, which then impacts how we feel and how we kind of experience the world. I mean, just one thing that we've also spoken about before, that I wanted to touch upon was this idea, well, not this idea, this this fact that all of the jobs that you've ended up in are not ones that you've applied for. Is that right?
It is. It's a very bizarre situation that when I apply for a job, I don't get the job that I apply for. But something always comes out of it.
Yeah.
And that's really tough. When you're, my consultant post, didn't get the one I thought I wanted. Actually, the one that they made for me because somebody had just resigned and can we all get this together turned out to be the right job for me. If I'd got the one I thought I wanted, I'd have been desperately unhappy and frustrated. And
do you know, and that is a really important point, sorry, because I think this is something as well that we need to talk more about, and we need to, I think, also educate our younger people about, is that we sometimes can fixate on something that we think that we want, and sometimes we can, really chase something and then it might not be the right thing. And this comes right back to what you were speaking about in the beginning, is that sometimes you have to just take those opportunities and you have to stop. I see it all the time where, particularly women will, opportunities will come their way that are great opportunities. And as an outsider looking in, you can see that they're amazing opportunities. But it's almost like our fear then wraps itself up as logic. Well, I can't do that because it's not what I know and I'm not going to be good enough, or it's not going to be as much money, or, X, Y, Z, I'm not, and it's like, no, these opportunities, you keep seeing these things knocking on your door for a reason, take them, and just remember that everything you've thought to be true may not be what you think, because we've got a very, conditioned way of looking at things. We're taught to think about things in a certain way. Yeah.
It's that, generally women will only apply for a job if they know they can already do it.
Which I am one of the one. I didn't when I was, anyway, that's how I ended up in what I was doing. I applied for a job where I didn't have the leadership experience. I didn't have the teaching experience. Well, I didn't have as much as I should have had. But I put my head on the line.
And with the Riverstone job, which they offered me, but there was a medical director job that I had been waiting months and months and months to come up. And, sod's law, I get offered the job by Riverstone, and a contact at that trust phones me literally 3 days apart, the phone call, to say it's finally being advertised.
Oh, and, wow.
Yeah. So I had these two jobs. The one I was sure I wanted. Mm-hmm. And the thing that actually, I spent weeks, Riverstone were very patient because I spoke to so many people, about leaving or joining the NHS, later on. And I was having all of these conversations as well as talking to Riverstone. And the thing that made the difference was when the job description for the NHS medical director job was actually published. And I looked at it and I was like, I can do that. I do all of those things already. I just do them in a hospital in Birmingham. I would just be moving to a hospital somewhere else to do them. This other job, that's new. I can probably do those things. I don't know if I can yet.
Love it.
And that was actually the thing that swayed it, was I can do this job, eyes closed. I'll just need to meet some, different people and learn some slightly different systems, but this one's new. And what's the worst thing? I can go back. Like I say, I think being really burnt out at the time probably helped my if I was thinking on full conscious rational brain, maybe I wouldn't have made that decision.
Oh, don't say that.
But actually it was the best decision I've made.
You went with your gut.
Let me give you another gut example. So hobby that I have, I'm resting at the moment, but I play the tuba in a brass band.
Oh, I didn't know that. I knew you were running, but I didn't know.
Well, I can't do running and brass banding at the same time,
well, I don't know.
And have a full-time job.
I don't know.
And have a full-time job. But I've been, so brass bands, it works like football leagues. You've got sections 1 to 4 and you've got a championship top section. And I've been playing in a second section band and it was great. And then the European Brass Band Championships came to the NIA in Birmingham. And somebody was needed to sell programmes. And I should have been revising for my paediatrics exam. I knew I didn't want to be a paediatrician. I was pretty sure I knew enough to scrape. So should have spent the day revising. Thought, I'll go and sell programmes. Through that, I met some new people and then ended up playing for a championship section band for 3 years. Had to stop playing championship section because I kept failing my medical exams that you take once you're qualified to get onto the next bit of your career. So, that was perhaps, rehearsing 5 nights a week several times a year isn't that helpful with my career choice. But that was one of those. I was do the comfortable thing, stay in, revise for your exam. do the slightly outside your comfort zone, go and sell programs, just see what comes of it. And that's sort of how my career's worked.
And I love that, Zoe, and I think that's a really great place to kind of wrap it up, I think, because there's some real key messages. I mean, there's been some key messages throughout, but I think, you know, kind of listening to your gut, which I think we are as women, anybody, we should, you know, we're kind of conditioned out of doing that. But I think as women, we tend to be a lot more that feminine energy. We're a lot more in tune with our intuition. We should listen to it more. Yeah. But also as well, this idea that, you know, we can keep challenging ourselves. You know, if we want to stay in our comfortable hell, you know, then you can stay there if you want, or you can choose to, you know, push yourself outside of that comfort zone. Because honestly, I think that when we do that, you know, the world opens up and opportunities open up that you never could have imagined, that are probably going to be a lot better than what
Absolutely.
And I think you're a perfect example of that. So, and as women, we can do anything. Absolutely. I mean, men can too, but, you know, we can only talk from a female perspective. So thank you so much, Zoe. I think we could talk, you know, to a larger extent in terms of both of our experiences and where we're at now. But, you know, thank you so much for coming here today, for taking the time to talk about your experiences, to talk about the industry as a whole. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.